Just checking that it is still morning. Morena, kia ora tātou. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be sharing this slot with Malcolm to speak to you this morning. I'm really pleased to be able to share this slot with Malcolm because it shows how effectively central government and local government are working together on some very important issues. I'd like to acknowledge the Minister for Local Government, the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta. Her address has really set the foundations for a very good discussion, and I think I could feel stirring in the room as Lynn Stevens QC was speaking to you about the Havelock North Inquiry findings and recommendations. I also just want to acknowledge other distinguished members present today. I've spotted some mayors' chairs and we've got some distinguished speakers from overseas also, so welcome to you all. The Minister spoke this morning about the challenges facing the Three Waters sector in New Zealand across drinking water, environmental challenges and also regulation. She talked about how important it is for us to work together to find solutions to these challenges. I want to emphasise the Minister's message that the challenges facing us are not just in responding to the issues identified by the Havelock North Drinking Water Inquiry or even in the wider drinking water space. Our analysis tells us that we've got to take a broader water infrastructure focus, and that includes wastewater and stormwater. All the indicators are that the Three Waters system across the country is in need of attention. This slide was, a variation of this slide was in the Minister's presentation just now, this morning. I'm focusing on the funding pressures in my presentation, and Malcolm is going to pick up and talk a little bit more about funding and financing options. So through this very, very quick presentation, I'll outline as briefly as I can what we're doing to understand the scale of the funding challenge that faces local government, and talk briefly about what we know, and more importantly what we don't know, and what we're trying to do to fill the gaps. What we know is that there are a broad range of funding challenges for councils in relation to the management and maintenance of the Three Waters system. These challenges come from the need to meet community expectations and regulatory requirements for quality drinking water, wastewater, fresh and also coastal water. They come from a need for water infrastructure to support housing and development, and there's especially pressure in high growth areas. They come from a need to replace ageing assets. They come, and also this can be a challenge which is exacerbated when there isn't clear information on the condition of those assets. They come from a need to respond to climate change demands and address infrastructure and resilience issues. This has been mentioned by others this morning. They also come from a need to provide additional or improved infrastructure due to tourism inflows. For many councils, these challenges are underpinned by a small rating base, and for some, it's even worse, they're struggling with declining rating bases. In some, there are a diverse and significant number of funding pressures facing New Zealand's Three Waters systems. So what do we know about the size of this problem? We've some idea of the potential size of the drinking water quality challenge because of work that was referenced by the Minister that we commissioned from BECA. This enabled us to estimate the cost of upgrading water treatment systems in response to two of the Havelock North Inquiry recommendations. Now, this is not to preempt the government's consideration of those recommendations, but we wanted to get an assessment should those recommendations decide to be implemented. So what we found was that in relation to the recommendation on mandatory compliance with drinking water standards and the abolition for secure groundwater classification, which would mean that all drinking water from bores would need to be treated. The Becker report told us, or estimated, that the country would face an overall capital cost of around 300 to 570 million, and an estimated ongoing operating cost of around 10 to 20 million per annum to address just those two recommendations specifically. Now, those are significant sums of money, but we know from others in the sector estimates of the costs. Depending on what else you take into consideration, estimates are much higher again. So if, for example, if required to complete this work through these implementation of these recommendations, it's possible that some councils may also want to upgrade other drinking water infrastructure at the same time. And so those kinds of capacity upgrades would certainly add to those costs quite significantly. The report that we commissioned also showed us that the cost of upgrades of this kind would be borne disproportionately across water providers. Some would be affected far more than others. These costs may be more affordable if spread across a wider population rather than being borne solely by the direct population served by each treatment plant or bore. It's important to note that the estimated costs that I'm referring to relate to network supplies only, and we're aware that there are communities where private providers, or some community and private providers are serving some very, very small community groups. They're not covered in these costs. What about wastewater? We don't yet know as much as we would like about this aspect of water. Again, the department has commissioned a project to identify the costs nationwide to upgrade wastewater infrastructure to comply with increasing standards and targets under the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. We've commissioned Boffa Miskell and GHD to undertake this work in partnership with Water New Zealand. They've been working directly with water service managers in councils to get this information, and the work is still current, so we will know in a few months' time what that's telling us about the nature of those costs. But there's still a lot else that we don't know, unfortunately. We're building our understanding of the costs of drinking water, and we're trying to get a handle on wastewater infrastructure costs. We also need to know more about the costs of the third water, stormwater, also really important as identified in the Havelock North inquiry. As you all know, managing stormwater is complex and demand is driven by events outside of our control, it's the weather. Management of stormwater is closely connected to land use. You don't need me to tell you that the need for more permeable surfaces in our more built-up urban environments is an issue in order to disperse water, rainwater, before it gets into the drains. But we would say that new developments, where they are underway, create more opportunities to achieve dispersal through local planning requirements. But we're working with other agencies, such as MB, the Ministry for the Environment and the Ministry for Civil Defence and Emergency Management, to help us understand the costs associated with stormwater, although I suspect further research may be needed. In addition, we're looking at long-term plans to see what councils intend to spend on Three Waters infrastructure over the next 10 years. This will give us a picture of future spending, projected spending. We also don't know what tomorrow's technology will bring. We do want to be in a position to benefit from the developments in technological advances that may make it more economical to extend the life of water assets or deliver cheaper new water assets. So I've gone very fast because Malcolm and I are sharing this slide. We do want to try and allow a few minutes for any questions you may have right at the end. What I've gone through very rapidly is what we're doing to understand the scale of the challenge, and as you'll see, our information is still patchy. But what we're clear about is that the funding pressures are going to be significant. They occur across all three waters and they occur across the country. While I've focused solely on what we're doing to better understand our funding pressures, the review of Three Waters that's been carried out by my team in association with a number of colleagues from other agencies is looking at challenges and solutions across the board. We certainly welcome your feedback. The Minister has indicated that she wants the government to work collaboratively with local government, and that is genuine. We welcome your contributions to the work as the review progresses. The slide behind me poses two questions that we'd particularly like to get your thoughts and advice on, but feel free to share any other information, of course. So I do encourage you to go to our website, identified in the pink or salmon colour on the screen. Read the material that's available there. You'll see the key findings from the Stage 1 review of Three Waters. You'll see relevant cabinet papers, and you'll be able to access the Becker report from there as well. Highlighted in green on the screen behind me is also the email address where you can contact the project team directly with questions, comments, invitations for us to come and speak to you. We do want to have every opportunity to engage to support the work that the Minister is leading on behalf of the government. I'll leave it there. I'm happy to take questions if there's time left after Malcolm has spoken to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I will try to be brief. Helen and I shared presentations. What I thought I'd try to do is we start out on essentially a process of regulatory design. My experience of that is clarity of terms is very important. I'll talk about that with co-regulation later on. But I thought what I try to do is unpick funding, financing and affordability. At least give you my perspective on it, and actually throw out a couple of hairy questions for the members. So I'm thinking about it like this. So we have to identify the funding need, then we have to identify a funding source, and that then gives us options around which financing options we have. So it's a sort of a circle. They are different. The definition's up there, that's drawn from our funding review back in 2015. Funding is the source of the money to pay for a project or service. Someone's got to pay. Financing is arrangements that make sure you've got the money to do a project there when you need it. That's essentially debt for the most part. It can be other things, and I'll talk about that. But you can't have financing without funding. Okay? So what do we know about funding then? I won't dwell on this. I know it's bigger than the bread box. And there are three pieces of work that sort of been tracking in this direction for a long time. It actually started, in my view, not long after I joined the sector, when the National Infrastructure Unit put out its first paper on the state of infrastructure of the thing, and Richard's smiling there because he was one of the authors. It went through each of the classic network utilities and set of water. That was pretty rough. There was limited information, we didn't know about performance, it looked bad. So the view of the membership was, well, we've got to find out if that's true or not, because there is the first problem. We don't have good data. We don't know what the state of the assets were well, and it's very hard to communicate to consumers, and I'm going to use that term, not ratepayers. Consumers, are they getting value for the dollar that they are spending? So the Three Waters project looked at that. We went out and talked with the membership, the owners of the assets primarily, and our view was that actually the thing wasn't fundamentally broken, but by God, there were some challenges ahead because primarily of what we called at that time the renewals curve. This is long-lived intergenerational assets, and a lot of it was reaching end of life, which required us to think about how we were going to have good stewardship of those assets to ensure we were renewing them at the right time. And it was different in different places. It's not, this is the other thing to bear in mind. It is different in different places, and different people who approach this in different ways. We also knew that the other big problem or issue was the fact that standards tend to go one way, and it's not down. There were three things going on there. We've got increased concern quite properly about environmental water quality in our catchments. We've got the issue around increased health drinking standards, and that was before Havelock. And then finally we've got the issue around resilience. I mean, as you swap out clay pipes for pipes that are more resistant to earthquakes, for example, as Christchurch found, and they had to do it all at once. So those things are all going one way, and that's a cost. Then the next suite of reports that have appeared over the last several years have been from the Office of the Auditor General, who have consistently asked the question, why is it that CapEx spent is less than CapEx budgeted, CapEx spent is less than CapEx budgeted. This is not a one-off, this has been happening every year. Now there are a variety of answers to that question, and I've had many put to me by the membership, but the worrying one is, are we investing properly in those assets long term? Because if we're not, if we're saving money now, or what I used to call, well, business sweating the assets, that is fine if you're doing that properly, but it creates potentially an intergenerational issue down the track, okay, for the next generation of payers. And that, again, just in the most recent one issued a month or so ago, CapEx spent was $3.8 billion, budgeted was $4.8 billion. There was $1 billion difference. That, we need to address that question, why? Final one is, of course, Havelock North, and I won't dwell on that other than to say, as Justice Evers said, it was significant. But the bottom line is 20%, 759,000 people of the service population are supplied water, quote, that is not demonstrably safe to drink. Now, I always like to do regulatory design when you don't have a crisis, but by God, the old rule that I used to work to is never waste a crisis. And that's what we're in now. So these are a burning platform now. We need to understand that, however, having said that, we need to make sure we're not overreacting with it. It's a considered judgment, a considered design that supports sound investment, that supports sound stewardship going forward in a considered way. Because this is, we've got to make sure we understand that against the outcomes we want. And as has been noted, aggregation is a way of dealing with some of those things. Funding options. That graph there is again drawn by, from our funding review. It's 2013 data, but look, the guts of it isn't going to have changed much. The bottom line is councils draw most of their revenue from rates, property tax. The next one, and it's a substantial drop, is used fees. And then you have other things such as investment income, so on and so forth. And it's quite mixed across the country. So some councils with substantial investment funds are in a much better position than councils that do not. The key point, though, is that rates drive is the main funding source at the moment. User fees are the next, as I said, and volumetric pricing for water is a user fee. So you get what I call revenue certainty and revenue adequacy when you price the water for use. It has other advantages in my view, primarily demand management. When you tell a person what they're pricing, what they're using, and what they price, you'll find there's behavioural changes almost immediately. Everywhere, just about as I understand, where a meter has been introduced and you provide that price information to consumers, they modify behaviour. The advantage of that, not allowing them to manage their costs, is you get better network utilisation going forward. So often the capex that I thought I was going to have to spend, I don't, because I'm getting better utility use out of that network. The issues that I just put up there, I just want to say, affordability as a concept, as an issue, arises whether it's rates or fees, or use of volumetric pricing. And I would observe, and I've got a little bit of experience in this, that pricing the true cost of a service actually may substantially increase the cost unless you can find an efficiency dividend, as I call it. That is, am I running my system hard, effective, well, and I can drive out unnecessary costs that I can then deliver and offset the need for increased pricing. So that's what I call the efficiency dividend. So if you can achieve that, that's great. If you can't, price is going up, because the purpose of pricing is to deliver revenue adequacy and revenue certainty. You need those two things to empower financing, because the financier wants to get paid back. And the financier wants to know that it will get paid back, and waiting for one-off grants is probably either not going to get you financing, or the price for that financing is going to be significant to match the risk of that financing. So the question that I put out here, not for debate, is actually, should water services pricing concern itself with affordability at all? And the reason I say that is that in the electricity, gas and telecommunications market, it basically doesn't, okay? So when we used to price in my old business, we would take affordability into concern only to the extent it impacted on our competitive provision. And I'll be brutally frank, if someone or sector or class of customers did have affordability concerns, I was rather interested they'd be with my competitor, not with me, because that raises, credit issues. So the basic way I would think about it is, if there's an affordability issue, which is a public policy issue, that arguably is a social welfare issue, which can be addressed by other interventions. But to ask a provider of a network service to price that is a different way, because their prime rationale is to fund the network, fund the upgrades, fund the extensions, generate a return on capital. Okay? So we need to be clear about terminology and not conflate those three concepts, in my view: funding, financing, affordability. That is not to say affordability is not a significant concern. By God, it is. And one of the reasons I'm happy that the government's finally accepted our position that local government funding should be reviewed, and it's about to be announced with Productivity Commissions to address that issue. But don't mistake, at the end of the day, someone's got to pay. So what are the financing options? And I'll put them all up there again. This is from our previous work. Borrowing, and that's essentially banks, the LGFA, obviously, in our sector, significant, and I know that they do a good job as the banks are borrowing about a lot to me, and that's a good thing. Borrowing is an intergenerational approach on intergenerational assets, but actually, in our sector, there's pretty mixed use of borrowing, and in fact, some of our members don't have borrowing. Now, I don't blame them for that, because the political incentive on them is to be rewarded for not having debt. In fact, that's been the message from central government for a very long time. Now central government's coming along and saying, by the way, you should be doing debt. Well, hold on. Which one do you want? But the bottom line is, from a network point of view, debt is actually a very fair way of spreading intergenerational costs. I had a debate with one member the other day who don't have debt and are funding this on an ongoing basis. I said, you're doing two things. One, you're overtaxing the current generation to pay for a benefit for the next generation, or you're underinvesting in this generation, creating a liability for the next. Which one is it? And if it's neither, where's your data to prove it? That's what we talk about. And that raises the concerns that lead into the sort of issues that Justice Stevens talked about. It goes into that whole thing. So this is about understanding what we want to achieve, which is why we're in an outcomes point of view, and then how we're going to achieve it. Then you can have special purpose bonds. That's a targeted debt thing for a specific project, when not really used that much here. PPPs are actually a legitimate way of doing it. They've got a really bad rap at the moment, primarily because you've got to understand what you're doing. Kite was an example where probably they could, had a great brand, but if you don't know how to specify service levels and outcomes and link that to performance with the provider of the thing, you're in big trouble, because they're going to take you to the cleaners, because that's what I do. They're a commercial operation, but they are, if you can properly specify them, they are a tool to help finance. Then we've got the one of privatisation. That is, give it to somebody else to worry about. That's off the table here, but actually, it is an option, but not on the table. And the final one is franchising. That is, you can still own the assets, but you offload it for a period of time for someone else to run. That's actually been done here. Remember the Papakura, I understand, did that for a while.
I remember.
Yeah, oh, they're still there, are they? No, okay. I thought they'd done a run, but anyway, sorry. It can be done. So what I'm saying is those are tools, but each of them has to be funded. Who funds? The user. Now you can hide that within a political debate about rates, or you can target it with the user fee, or you can offset some of that by using investment income and all that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, someone's going to pay. That's me. Very briefly, I just want to say we put out this thing about this is about just to assist option selection to make some of our members to understand the difference of this. And for some of you may think this will sound like sucking eggs, but not necessarily everybody. So as the regulatory design goes in, they're going to be looking at, are we getting the right investment outcomes, delivering the right health and environmental outcomes over time, fair between generations? That's the reality of the regulatory debate, in my view, in a nutshell. Thank you.
Just before lunch, we might have time for 2 or 3 questions from either Helen or Mel.
Ulrich Glasner from Pizza Legislative Council. I think it's excellent to hear from the federal government and from the minister that they have a holistic view on the three waters issue and effects on the environment in general. My question goes in the direction, what about the 100,000 of people who are living on permitted private wastewater treatment plants called septic tanks, and as well on privately owned water supply systems we have no record over. This is, for me, massive public health risks, and how it is envisaged to address this issue.
Very good question.
Yeah, I've got a point of view about that. I've been through this a few times. One of the big issues on regulatory side is all about the picture stuff. At some point, you've got to sharpen that to what are the rules. So what I hear in that is a debate about what I call the de minimis threshold. Okay? Does the regulatory regime you apply to everyone, or is there some sort of cut-off where the cost-benefit of applying the compliance framework outweighs the benefit to be attained? That's a judgment. My view will be that there will be a de minimis threshold, because at some point the cost-benefit of people that are on those sorts of systems. But the quid pro quo is they accept and understand the risk, sign off on it, and don't sue the council later on when it doesn't work.
I can only add that it is a concern to us. We're working on the details of the regulatory design and what the regulator will actually cover. So that's a level of detail that we can't give you an answer yet, but it is something that is clearly a public health safety concern for us.
Is there a potential conflict, or at least a tension, between private ownership being off the table and the ability of utilities, who have to all be privately owned, to ignore affordability? And how could publicly owned entities seriously ignore affordability?
Look, I'm doing a classic, this is the way you know David as well as I do. It comes down to essentially a governance issue for me, David. Is the role of the governance of the entity that's delivering it to deliver political, social outcomes or technical outcomes, essentially. And now, my view is that actually ownership is a legitimate regulatory tool. And I would think a classic example of that is Transpower, which is a monopoly. It's been in the electricity business, even though the other companies, a lot of them are privatised or partially so. Transpower's remained 100% ownership in the Crown. That allows the government, the shareholder of the day, to appoint the board, and that's a dimension there. So again, if that's the way to go, then we need clarity that that is what is happening, okay? So why? So that the public understand that, because what we're saying at that point, in my view, is there will be a form of cross-subsidisation between those who can afford to pay for those who cannot. Or, and that is either straight away in my view, or long-term from an investment point of view, because you're not getting the revenue to support that. So I think it's a legitimate public choice, David, but all I ask is there be transparency about that, so there's accountability for that.
This government will be concerned about the affordability issue, and again, as we're working through the details, this is something that will be debated vigorously by the panel of ministers that Minister Mahuta referred to, who are working with her. That this will be of particular interest to them. So you're absolutely right to raise the question, David, and it is something that we're looking to address.
I think we also must listen very carefully, word by word, what the Minister said. And she did refer to larger authorities supporting smaller authorities. What does that mean?
380 people died on our roads last year. Sort of $500 billion that you're talking about spending on fixing the water supplies, could they be better spent on the road?
It may well be a good time for lunch.
Can I just make one comment, Mr. Stewart? One of the issues in regulatory design will be the issue of moral hazard. Okay, do you know what I mean by that? For some of our members who have actually been good stewards of their assets, who have invested well, if you go across subsidisation regime, I'm not saying you should, I'm just saying these are the sort of issues that regulatory design has to encompass. What's the message? I'm rewarding those who haven't and penalising those who, how do we think about that? So I'm not saying I haven't got the answer, but this is why regulatory design is fiendishly difficult.
Thank you, both Malcolm and Helen, for that. So we will now adjourn for lunch, and if we could reconvene at 1 p.m, it'd be greatly appreciated.